All right. Thank you, Professor. Greetings, fellow panelists and future space enthusiasts out there. I'm Aravind, and here for the Space Habitat event organized from December 5th to 6th, I'm here to contribute or pitch in my idea about health-related issues pertaining to astronauts, especially sleep scheduling too. So, yeah, as fancy as it sounds, COSMOREPOPHILAE, sleep assistant. What basically we have, our team have devised is an interstellar circadian rhythm synchronizer and a sleep scheduling mechanism for deep space travelers. Well, sleep is something which has been the point of scrutinization for a really long period of time, ever since we humans stepped into being a spacefaring species. So, addressing this particular aspect really helps us get an edge over reaching and realizing our dream eventually to reach a goal. Okay, so before we speak about sleep, what exactly is sleep? Uh, there are lots of literature out there, be it from Harvard Medical School or from various other literatures out there, stating the importance of sleep. We also see few people who are achieving a lot of things even without catching up a good amount of sleep. Um, what exactly is the sleep for? Is it a survival necessity, or rather, is it an unproductive state of inactivity? So, let us understand this quite deeply. Just for giving you a brief idea about how much time you spend sleeping, say for instance, if you are 60 years old, and I'm not rather being stereotypical, if you are 60 years old, on an average, you spend about 20 years just out of sleeping. So that's a really huge amount of time wherein you could rather be productive. So if we need to enhance the level of technology, and if we need to, you know, get an edge over your neighbors, perhaps he is getting a good car because he is working hard. If you also should work hard, should you actually sacrifice your sleep? Is sleep that insignificant? So we all got 24 hours a day, and it turns out that sleep is not really an inactive period, or rather, it's not an unproductive period. What your work, or rather your profession, does for your mind, sleep does for your body, and that's how important sleep actually is. So, delineating or digressing from the philosophical terms, we have to understand basically the science of sleep, what actually goes behind this particular sleep phenomena, before we actually can conclude whether sleep is important or not. So, ever since our advancement as into the spacefaring species, the understandings or the biological implications are still on a steady rise. We have advanced in terms of material sciences, in terms of rocket propulsion sciences, and several terms of engineering. But human body still remains a mystery, despite we spending about 2 billion years exploring exclusively about the species on the planet Earth, etc. So if it is science, nothing comes without a proper definition of what exactly sleep is. According to few sources and a popular book called The Science of Sleep, what it exactly states is human sleep is actually a reversible period of decreased consciousness and responsiveness, comprised of two distinct states known as rapid eye movement and non-rapid eye movement. Well, rapid eye movement and non-rapid eye movement are actually two different phases of sleep, which I'll very shortly be explaining about. So, sleep is the particular the phase of time wherein we are all our biological mechanisms they start to take rest, and then they regenerate for the next successive kind of activities. That's one of the main reason where we have decreased consciousness. uh, you know this is something which is common. Say for instance, if you're waiting for a bus for a really long time, you naturally tend to fall asleep. And do you have the same state of consciousness? Does your body's control system, speaking in electrical perspective, does your body control system react the same way as it is when you're awake? Your head droops down, and sometimes embarrassingly you start drooling out. What's basically happening is we are losing a sense of our consciousness. So our body totally has a decreased consciousness in order to give a state of rest for the entire body. However, lack of proper sleep has several detrimental effects over the body, both in terms of mental as well as in physical state. If you say if you need to say for instance, if you need to become like the next Jeff Bezos or the next Elon Musk, sacrificing your sleep actually does has a counterproductive effect rather than being a productive effect. So basically, when we speak about sleep deprivation, a lot sleep deprivation brings behind a lot of psychological issues as well as health related issues. It brings in a lot behind it. This infographic has a very clear and lucid representation of what are the implications. If you're a gym lover and if you have a proper diet, as well as if you're lifting weights frequently, if you don't get proper sleep, you won't see the effects. So in the long term, cancer, heart disease, blood pressure, risk of death, and several other implications comes behind it. Um, okay, so these days, especially for the shift workers, night shift workers, especially IT field people, and especially scrutinizing on astronauts, the center of focus of our entire topic. What we can infer is we, because of artificial lights, are hacking the system of sleep. So does science. Science also has its own nature and science. Humans are just minuscule when competing with science and nature. So when it comes to sleep, what are the two major influencing factors that makes us shut our eyes, even though if we take a lot of caffeine, if we take a lot of energy drinks and boosters, what makes us sleep at some point of time? Why do we lose to science eventually? It's basically to do with these two factors. The first thing is circadian rhythm, which is one of the keywords in our topic, and this is the center of scrutinization. And the next thing is sleep pressure. Well, uh, I'm not a classical professor explaining concepts very complexly, just like how you find in colleges. But circadian rhythm is, to put it in Pidgin terms, out of my understanding, it's basically like a biological clock in your body. So you have a mechanical clock, but your body system has a 24-hour automatic clock, or rather a response control system response, which states when you should eat, when you should feel hungry, when you should sleep, and when you should do your particular activities. It's a response to an habit. So sleep pressure is something which is more on the chemical side. I guess people who are into economics could relate more to this. It's just like a compound interest. Basically, at the beginning of the day, you have a certain amount of chemical that's called as adenosine. And as the day progresses, this adenosine chemical gets compounded to the existing value. So at the end of the day, when you have sufficient amount of adenosine, it triggers the receptors in the brain to shut your eyes and get some sleep for resting your body. So adenosine chemical buildup is another one of the reason for inducing sleep. So circadian rhythms and sleep pressure. So when you take a coffee or when you take an energy drink, what you're basically doing is you're hacking the sleep pressure. Well, taking coffee and energy drinks, well, it might be useful for a short period of time, but in the long run, when we speak scientifically, in the long run, it poses hazard to your body. You are indirectly inducing a lot of external unhealthy stuff into your body, which eventually makes your body weak and irresponsive to the further intake of those things. It's just like Dr. Hyde Jekyll, that story wherein he takes excess of chemicals eventually to turn himself back into the normal person. Similarly, excess of caffeine, eventually that dosage grows on. So we were actually seeking for a method which doesn't involve any internal means, medications, caffeine, or any other biohacks, but rather we were actually planning for a non-intake based light therapy based system. So speaking about astronauts exclusively, so when we speak specifically about circadian rhythm, because that is the focus of the entire study here, uh, unlike the other sleep pressure, circadian rhythm exclusively depends upon the light, the amount of light and the amount of melatonin which secretes in response to the light, which the brain triggers. It's entirely dependent on that particular aspect. So when astronauts get launched from different launch stations from different countries, they are actually getting launched at the common, say for instance, International Space Station or eventually an extra a vehicle, a space vehicle for deep space exploration. They get launched from different time zones basically. So for that particular purpose, um, whenever they are getting launched, say for instance, if they are in ISS, they experience about 16 sunrises per day. So every 90 minutes they experience a sunrise, which severely affects their circadian rhythms, and it triggers the melatonin, and it eventually confuses the hormones secreting melatonin, and it confuses the brain such that you will be in a state of unrest for a really long time. So our idea is actually to hack the circadian rhythm. Since circadian rhythm is not something that depends on coffee or any other internal inputs, but rather it depends upon just mere light, predominantly on mere light. So we planned of taking that particular string as the concept of our entire study, and we worked on it. As you can see over the bottom graph, if you wake up at 6 a.m., the mind senses the light basically, and right from 6 a.m. till afternoon, or perhaps even evening in some countries, depending upon the light, we will have a relatively low secretion of melatonin, beyond which the secretion of the secretion of melatonin actually happens, which triggers your brain to sleep, to make you sleep. So that's the reason you're actually feeling tired. And I guess you could argue with me, as in, like, whenever I'm using phones or laptops, or if I'm involved in some indulging entertaining activity, I don't get sleep. What's the melatonin doing over there? Well, it's again the sense of your vision, the amount of light, and the indulgement which you give towards the entertainment activity, because of which more melatonin secretion related to the light secretion will be more. So this is about the phases of sleep. As we have 4 phases of sleep, when I come to the hardware segment, which we actually developed, it will be more clear as to what exactly the function of this thing is. We actually developed a combination of hardware and software based solution. Speaking about the software solution, Gokul will take on further to explain about the entire conceptual.
Hello, I hope I'm audible. Um, Hello, hello. Am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you. So I'll be talking about the software solution part of our entire project. So our software is basically a deep learning model that we created to not only predict the amount of sleep that an astronaut has to take, but it also predicts the amount of exercise as well as the diet which an astronaut has to consume and have throughout the day, because both exercise and diet is a major part of an astronaut's day-to-day schedule. So I'll be talking about how we develop the entire software solution, software stack of our project. So for any deep learning model, the baseline of any deep learning model is the data set. Since it is a supervised learning process, we decided to go with a very large data set to minimize as much to get as much minimum data error as possible, and to increase the accuracy as much as possible. So based on this sparse data from NASA's database, which had barely 100 to 1,000 data points, we took that as a baseline to develop a particular data set which we found on other sources like Kaggle. Um, and based on that, we developed over 100,000 data points. Uh, for sleep, the parameters that we used for sleep were yeah, this is the parameters that we use for diet table and exercises. We used age, weight, height, gender, and work burden. Age is basically the age of the astronaut, and weight and height are the uh, weights and heights of the astronauts. Whereas work burden is basically the activity level or amount of work the astronaut has done throughout the day. And this is the data set that we use for generating the amount of sleep that the astronaut needs to take. Again, work burden is the amount of hours is put in throughout the day. This could not only include physical work but also mental work as well. We've taken both of them into consideration. Diet is the Diet is the amount of calories is consumed, he or she has consumed when in space, whereas fitness is the amount of exercise or amount of workout is done throughout the day in space. And noise in space is one essential factor that we found while researching about the data set. It plays a very vital role in monitoring the sleep. So we've taken the noise in space essentially to be the amount of noise in the cabin where the astronaut is sleeping. We've also taken into consideration the prescribed medications as well as pre-flight and in-flight time, and and yes, slam shift as well plays a very vital role in the entire data set. So these are the dataset sources that we've taken it from. So again, the next part after the dataset is pre-processing the entire dataset. So to pre-process the entire dataset, we had to research a lot and come up with formulas. So this is a well known formula from a very well known research paper to get the BMM of women and men. So we use this formula based on the inputs from the user to calculate the BMM for men and women respectively. And then our deep learning model basically finds the correlation between the parameters, and based on the assigned weights, it calculates the amount of sleep the astronaut needs, as well as the amount of calories the astronaut needs to uh, consume during his day in space. So based on the calories we get, we divide it into the ratios of breakfast, lunch, and dinner, breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks. So again, to make the model work, we've used some dummy food items from NASA's dataset, which we can scale up any day we want. And based on the required calories, the model essentially recommends the food items that the astronaut needs to take in order to fulfill the calorie intake for the day. And similarly, to predict the exercise table, we've taken into consideration the exercises that an astronaut basically does in space, and taken a couple of them into consideration for this project. So this is basically the entire architecture of our model. This might seem a bit intimidating, but yes, I'll try to break it down as much as possible. So the input layer basically has eight data points, whereas the output layer has a single data point. Output layer is the one to the extreme right, whereas the input layer is the one to the extreme left. And there are 10 hidden layers, out of which the hidden layers have 64 and 128 nodes respectively. The first two and the last two have 64 nodes, whereas the middle six of them have 128 nodes. This is a very scaled down model of our scaled down representation of a model, because we couldn't fit the entire thing onto this PPT. We've scaled it down to a very small value. So the input layer uses a normal kernel initializer. uh, yeah, the input layer uses normal kernel initializer, whereas the activation function for the hidden layers, we've used it to be ReLU throughout all 10 hidden layers. And the loss function is the mean absolute error, and the optimizer for the entire model, we've used Adam. um, yes, so this was trained using TensorFlow. The entire model was trained using TensorFlow. We use TensorFlow as the backend software stack for the entire model. um, uh, so coming to the entire training part of it, this is the image that you see here is basically the entire neural network. And in order to make sure that there's no overfitting or there's no error in accuracy, we split the data into train and test in the ratio of 8 is to 2, and we also had a validation split of 40%. We trained the model for 6,000 epochs with over 100 steps, which essentially means 60,000 steps in total. So the output will basically, I'll put the output and analysis together so that it gives a better understanding. So your output will basically give a single value or a single amount of minutes that the astronaut needs to sleep, or the amount of calories that the person needs to sleep. And this is basically compared to the true value. The graph you see on the A graph, the one on the extreme right top, The graph is basically the true value versus the true value versus the predicted value. As you can see, it's very close, it's almost fitting the entire curve, which proves that our model is very accurate, and that is mainly because of the amount of epochs we trained it on and amount of time we trained it on. So to make sure that the entire thing is very appealing, we've combined it with a very nice GUI with an entire schedule generated. So all the user has to do is enter the parameters and the vitals, and based on our deep learning model, it creates the entire schedule and puts it out on the screen for you. I'll give it to Aravind to present the hardware part of a solution.
Uh, yeah, I request another 2 minutes to quickly complete the hardware segment as well. So we can actually monitor astronauts' sleep, but when it comes to inducing them, or rather helping them to get some sleep, because none of the astronauts are reluctant to sleep, but rather they can't catch up a sleep because of all the circadian changes that goes on. So to aid them in sleeping, what we basically adopted is for intelligent light therapy kind of mechanism. As you can see over here, we have designed a mask, the sleep-inducing mask, so-called as COSMOREPOPHILAE, which actually senses the astronaut's motion and appropriately it suggests. So giving a very quick overview, this might seem quite intimidating, but what actually this senses is rapid eye movement, as I said earlier, is nothing but the phase of sleep where astronauts, or rather any human for that matter, experiences all these nightmares, or rather wonderful dreams, which you could so call it. So predominantly 3 stages, right? From when you start, you enter into the phase of normal sleep, then you enter into deep sleep, and then when you enter into rapid eye movement, which is called as the dream stage. So each zone has its own kind of body activities. For the sake of example, and to quickly complete the presentation, if we consider just the REM phase, wherein you get dreams, if at all if you're facing a nightmare, then you will be having rapid heartbeats, but rather your body will be in a still motion. It won't have any rapid motion as such. So what basically we do is we will sense from the temperature sensor, we sense the body temperature, and from the tilt sensor we actually measure if the astronaut's body is moving or not. If it is not moving, and exclusively for this REM phase, since it's not moving, we understand, the machine understands that this is REM, and accordingly there will be light intensity which is induced in the eye. Light therapy is one of the proven therapy for adjustment of the circadian rhythm, and it helps in astronauts getting a good sleep. So according to REM, we have a specific intensity of light which is to be exposed. According to deep sleep, we have a specific intensity of light. So mimicking all those aspects and compiling them, we finally drafted this module. So speaking about the future prospects, since this is on a very general scale, we hope to extend it on a future scale as well. So this is our team, and these are the references.